Hello everybody, Jaindike Tech Reviews here. This is what I look like, and I've always wanted to have a dual CPU computer for no other reason other than that I think they're cool. And although they're not meant for consumers in any capacity, I finally managed to find one for 50 bucks. The Dell PowerEdge R715. Now this absolute unit was released back in 2010 as part of Dell's 11th generation servers and a counterpart to their Intel-based R710 series. I picked this thing up from a university surplus store and it was the equivalent of a run and drive car. All I knew is that it probably turned on. However, it comes with two wonderfully inefficient Opteron 6380 CPUs, each of them having 16 cores for a total of 32, and also 128 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. Which begs the question, can decommissioned enterprise hardware actually be the deal of a lifetime for consumers like you and I? I mean, these processors did come out 14 years ago on an architecture that was so bad that it financially crippled AMD, but surely 32 cores is enough to power through any workload I can throw at it. We're going to answer that question by testing if you could reasonably daily drive this system and if it can run 100 different VMs concurrently. But most importantly, we're going to see if you can game on the computer equivalent of an 8.2 liter V8 pushing 190 horsepower. The R715 was always spec'd with 2 CPUs per build, and it supported the Opteron 61, 2, and 300 series lineup. Back when these CPUs came out, just one of these processors would have set you back $1,100. It also had a TDP of 115 watts and was built on the 32 nanometer process and made use of the G34 socket. For that price, you got 16 threads with 16 cores, a base clock speed of 2.5 gigahertz, a single core turbo of 3.4 gigahertz, and an all-core turbo of 2.8 gigahertz. Now, I'm not sure I understand how the cache works, but this is the best I've got. We have 2 CPUs. Each CPU has 2 dies, and each die has 4 modules, and each module has 2 cores. According to Tech PowerUp, there's 16 kilobytes of L1 cache per core for a total of 256. On top of that, there's 64 kilobytes of shared L1 instruction cache per 2 cores per module for a total of 512 kilobytes. So, in total, one CPU has 768 kilobytes of L1 cache. This checks out in Task Manager, where it says across both CPUs we have 1.5 megabytes of L1 cache. Now the L2 cache, 2 megabytes per module, 8 modules per CPU, 16 megabytes in total. This checks out in Task Manager, where it says we have 32 megabytes of L2 cache across both CPUs. However, the L3 cache makes no sense. According to Tech PowerUp, there's 8 megabytes of L3 per die for a total of 16 per CPU. This also gives us a total of 32 megabytes of L3 for both the CPUs. However, Windows reports that there's 12 megabytes of L3 cache per CPU for a total of 24, and 24 doesn't equal 32. This also means that there's less L3 than L2, which makes no sense to me. I'm over here splitting hairs about a 14-year-old E-Way server CPU. Either way, the spec sheet, Task Manager, Tech PowerUp, CPU-Z, or I am confused. It's probably my fault, but either way, I'm gonna blame Windows, and the point is that the CPUs have some amount of cache. But that's not even the best part. Let's talk about the infamous architecture. The Opteron 6380 is a part of AMD's Abu Dhabi family. This family used the Piledriver architecture and was an improvement to their Bulldozer architecture. Piledriver used the same basic architecture but improved upon things like scheduling, clock speeds, and branch prediction. Bulldozer was AMD's first big attempt at a module-based approach. Each module had 2 integer cores that shared an L1 and L2, a front end, an instruction fetch and decode, and a floating point unit. This allowed AMD to advertise higher core counts, but each core wasn't as independent because they had more shared resources. This approach struggled in lightly threaded tasks such as games, and generally their performance was a lot weaker compared to Intel's offerings. Specifically, the floating point units, the FPUs, are often cited as a critical weakness of this architecture. Each module had one shared FPU consisting of 2 128-bit FMAC units. However, if 2 FPU heavy workloads landed in the same module, each of the cores would just contend over the FPU and nothing would get done. This was especially bad for games since they have a lot of FPU intensive workloads, including animations, engine math, and physics-based calculations. I can attest to this since I used to have an FX 9590 which used the Piledriver architecture, and it was essentially a space heater that occasionally spat out a few frames. This architectural nonsense came to a head in 2019 with a lawsuit. So basically, AMD had fake cores brought upon the idea that they shared a lot more resources than other architectures. That being said, the Opteron 6300s were competitively price and did offer good performance in some server workloads. Still, the underlying architecture caused AMD to lose over $1 billion in 2012 and ushered in the dark ages for Team Red. In 2017, AMD finally replaced its Opteron lineup with its Zen-based EPYC series, finally applying pressure to Intel and bringing them back from the dead. Also, if you've enjoyed yourself thus far, consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing because every interaction helps. Thank you. Regardless, it was finally time to boot this beast up and let the madness begin. Now, the noise this thing makes always scares me when I turn it on. It starts off loud and then eventually levels off to something bearable. I know that I could adjust the fan speed by changing the performance management settings in the BIOS, but we need every bit of power that we can squeeze out of this thing. Honestly, I was happy that I was getting a video signal out of it, and it was time to throw in a drive powered by the PERC H700 RAID controller. Now, I had two choices for an SSD. One was an OEM SSD that I bought off eBay a few years ago that looks like it's seen better days. The other SSD is an 11 drive that has the number 10 sharpened on it, and I ended up installing this one because it looked a little less destroyed. Since this device had a RAID controller, there's a little bit more setup to do. You go into BIOS, you create a virtual drive, and then you initialize it, and then you can install your Windows 10 bloatware. Long story short, it turns out that this drive is dead, so I swapped over to the OEM one and installed Windows 10. I'm sorry for using Windows 10. Humans are creatures of habit. I know I should have installed some Linux distro. Some of them are good for gaming nowadays, but I wanted something that was going to be easy, you know? Plug and play where I can ensure that all my software I'm going to need is going to be able to run. Including reboots, it took about a half hour to install Windows 10, and my penance is that when I got into the OS, only one of the CPUs was detected. Turns out Windows 10 only supports one socket. So instead of installing Linux, I decided to install Windows 10 Pro, of course, unactivated. Then we get into the internet issues. Plugging in Ethernet anywhere did not work in any capacity, and ultimately I ended up using a USB Wi-Fi adapter that got decent speeds. I did all the commands, I did the netsh in the flushing of the DNS, in the ipconfig, nothing worked, but we've internet. At idle, we were barely using any CPU and only 4 out of the 128 gigabytes of RAM. Finally, it was time to install a real graphics card in this server. Now, server CPUs typically don't have built-in integrated graphics like a lot of consumer laptop or desktop chips. Instead, they typically have a tiny onboard video controller built directly into the motherboard, which in our case is the Matrox G200EW. However, we're not going to be running anything on this because it only supports 2D graphics and has 8 megabytes of video memory and can barely run the Windows GUI. Obviously, you're not supposed to game or render anything with this video controller. It's just a little video output so you can mess around with your BIOS. But what I needed was a 3D capable, modern, dedicated graphics card. The 3060 that I was planning to use in this build did not fit inside the chassis, and it turns out if you try to run a server with the side panel pulled off, it rightfully starts screaming at you. So I did a bit of a hardware mod to make it work. To power it, I hotwired another 600 watt PSU by jumping 2 pins on the 24 pin connector, and we were up and running. However, there were still more problems. The PCIe slot is physically shaped like an X16. However, internally, only 8 of those lanes are connected, and they run at Gen 2 speed. Now, in a normal desktop with an X16 slot running at Gen 4 speeds, our 3060 would be getting about 32 gigabytes per second in each direction. However, our X8 Gen 2 connection only gets us about 4 gigabytes per second. This turned out to not really matter since our CPUs were the limiting factor in everything we did, and I was just happy to get this hack job up and running. At this point, I was also getting a little bit worried about tripping a breaker given how much is plugged in over here, but hey, that's what breakers are for. First test, general use, sometimes it was perfect, other times it was exceedingly slow and completely unusable. I set the system up as anyone else would, install Chrome, then install Steam, and then uninstall Edge and all the other Microsoft bloatware, and for the most part, it ran pretty well with a few hiccups here and there. During this time, only about 6 to 8 of the 32 cores saw any meaningful use, and the average use across these cores was around 40%. It was very odd. I could run multiple program setups at the same time, but for example, when I was extracting the Cinebench installer, I was getting only a few hundred something kilobytes per second, and it took over a half hour to install the graphics drivers. Also, the keyboard I was using just broke at some point for no reason. It was just plugged in and then croaked, which I've never had happen before, so I'm gonna blame the computer. Also, any screen tearing you see wasn't actually there. My capture card is just garbage. I'm so sorry. I'm going to buy a new one. Don't you worry. Cinebench R15 was up next and got a score of 1498, which was exactly what we expected. I found a video online of someone doing this exact test with the exact same dual CPU setup, and they got a score of 1499. So at the very least, we know our lack of performance is not an anomaly. Now, which was time for the gaming benchmarks. Up first, we got Left 4 Dead 2. It's a popular game. It came out a few years before these CPUs did, and it ran pretty well. In 1080p with the high settings, we got an average of 140 FPS with 1% lows of 59. Of the 32 cores, only about 8 to 10 saw any amount of meaningful use, and of those cores, only 1 to 2 of them saw utilization above 80%. However, as we'll see later, it turns out some games are actually optimized to support 32 nonsense cores across 2 CPUs and use all of them at the same time to their full capacity. Counter-Strike 2 is not one of these games. In 1080p with the medium settings, it only got about 40 frames per second. I couldn't get my overlay working, so we're going to have to rely on Steam's little metrics overlay, but you don't need any numbers to confirm that this game is not running well. Rainbow Six Siege took 10 minutes to launch in 1080p with the medium settings and got an average frame rate of 56 FPS and 1% lows of 29. It also roughly used each CPU evenly, both hovering around about 25% utilization. BeamNG Drive, much like Counter-Strike 2, was similarly not designed for this type of computer. In 1080p with the medium settings, it got an average of 22 FPS, 1% lows of 15, and all but 8 cores remained idle. I also tried dropping from normal settings to the lowest settings possible, and this did not affect performance in any capacity. Interestingly, when your car was parked, you got about 60 FPS, but then as soon as you moved, it dropped all the way down to 20, which... that's weird. I don't know what's going on there. GTA 5 Enhanced Edition. In 1080p with the high settings and no ray tracing, got an average of 29 FPS with 1% lows of 22. It actually somewhat used about 20 of the 32 cores here, with relatively even usage distribution across both of the 2 CPUs. I mean, it still wasn't great, but it was playable, and if for some reason you want to play GTA 5 at 30 FPS while sucking down a disproportionate amount of power, be my guest. Cyberpunk 2077 should be considered the gold standard for modern game development. This game used every core to its fullest potential, maxing out at the all-core turbo of 2.8 GHz and hitting a record temperature of 47 degrees Celsius. In 1080p with the medium settings and balanced CNN DLSS, it got an average of 27 FPS and 1% lows of 8. However, with frame gen turned on, the average frame rate over doubled up to 59 frames per second with 1% lows of 11. Those 1% lows aren't great, but it's a non-competitive single-player game that is notorious for being hard to run. Plus, I spent most of my time just driving around and loading in new areas, which is going to transiently spike your frame time. Either way, I'd consider this nothing short of a computational miracle. Somehow, we live in a world where Cyberpunk runs better than Counter-Strike. Yes, half the frames are fake frames, but the frame's still a frame when you only have 30 frames. You take what you can get. Now, I knew I had to do some virtualization tests, but couldn't figure out exactly what to do, so I just provisioned 100 virtual machines all running Solitaire. Each of them got 1 gig of RAM, 1 vCPU, and 10 gigs of storage while running Debian with a GUI. I automated their creation with the PowerShell script, and for the first pass, I decided to launch 20 of them. Overall, the CPU usage wasn't really impacted. I couldn't figure out how to play 23 games of Solitaire at once, but it did make use of 23 gigabytes of RAM. I then repeated this process with 100 virtual machines. Solitaire still ran well, and we were only using 50 gigabytes of RAM. Regardless, we have a few key takeaways from these experiments. 1. Turns out you can cut a hole in the side of your server and it will probably still work. However, don't do that. That's not recommended. We don't endorse that. 2. Cyberpunk is the most optimized game ever made. It would be so cool if more games were able to make use of ridiculous core counts. Personally, I just think it'd be really cool to run Counter-Strike 2 on enterprise hardware from 2006. Volvo, please fix. 3. As expected, this thing's a little impractical for gaming. It can decently run some. I'll give it that. Left 4 Dead 2, for example, ran great on this machine. However, for the rest of the games, the playability was that it hit 30 FPS or made heavy usage of frame gen. That being said, this type of hardware still does seem to have some sort of use for a home lab environment or experimental setup, especially for the price. Also, I've been gone for a while because I had to finish my degrees and get a job, and now we're done with that. So if you have any video ideas, let me know in the comments below, because most of what I'm cooking up right now is software-based. Also, Scrim's new album just came out, and it's alright. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider leaving a like or commenting because it genuinely helps me out. If you want to join the community, there's a link to the official Jaindike Discord server below in the description where we talk about computer stuff. If you have any questions or related comments, then leave them below and I'll be sure to respond to them. That's it. Have a great day. Goodbye.
when soft, like Samson got